Hi, so this is my presentation on uh, the culture of seafood in the DMV. So why did I choose this topic? Well, I always think that food is a pretty big part of culture. You know, it can tell a lot about the geography of the area, about the practices in the local industries, and a wide variety of things. I think about any one place. Um, it's also, quite important. Something that really travels. When we think of countries like Italy, India, and China, we see these dishes in our heads. So it's a really prominent thing. And when I lived uh, in my time living here and also in Baltimore in the summer of 2019, you couldn't avoid, I couldn't avoid this stuff. I was always been recommended, try the crabs, try the oysters, look at these crab cakes, etc. So that's kind of what propelled me here. Okay, so the history. People were eating crabs in the DMV since 1200 BCE. So, possibly it could have been the Nan-Koch tanks could have been the first to be eating in BC. And this followed on for the early colonies and well on into the 17th, 18th, 19th century and so on, which is actually something which previously was not thought by anthropologists. Okay. Modern practices. So right now everyone knows, steamed crab and a ton of Old Bay. That's what it is. But it wasn't always like that. Initially the only way crabs could have been eaten is through a can. They were always canned and shipped around the East Coast. But then some bright spark got the idea to, I'm gonna take a crab, steam it, and then send the whole thing somewhere else. But initially, not so successful. They tried putting them in barrels with ice, salt, and pepper, but the ice melted and washed away the seasoning, and then you get a bland crab, which was not very good. They tried again with parchment paper, and it worked a lot better. And that's kind of possibly the origins of such a newspaper with that. And this really started catching on at amusement parks and then later in restaurants and, to the world we have today. And when it started catching on, a lot of spices came with it. Old Bay, invented in the mid 20th century by a Jewish German immigrant, and a variety of practices which we now know are done. So another thing I was really intrigued to find is that the rich Black maritime culture in the DMV, and specifically in the seafood industry, with the rivers of with the Anacostia, Potomac rivers and the Chesapeake Bay, there was lots amounts of Black watermen. When they first came to Jamestown, a lot of this work, when the first indentured slaves came to Jamestown, a lot of this work was, on the water, on the bay, and this since continued. And then you have until what you have called blackjacks, which was just basically black sailors and fishermen. And with the growing amount of people and demand, then there's more ships need to build and more labor for it. So historically it's offered a lot of opportunities to Black people, including the Seamen's Protection Certificate issued just before the 19th century, which actually gave Black people citizenship way before the Emancipation Proclamation. And I think poignantly, the Bill of 1836 tried to limit the extent of the empowerment of Black people on the water. But it was just a fight. White sailors didn't want this. It wasn't in anyone's best interest, and they kept their Black employees along board. It also, with this empowerment, gave avenues for freedom. They could help runaway slaves escape up to the north, including, prominent figure Frederick Douglass. Very key person in the abolitionist movement. Okay, so in DC specifically, you have the District Wharf and the Fish Market. Post-Civil War, this was a heavily African-American community, and with what I established with the rich maritime culture within the Black community, this was very much intensified at the wharf, and you'd have a lot of opportunities at the fish market, on boats, being fishermen, being fishmongers, oyster shucking historically. And then with this trade, you also built up oyster houses, which were set up, more downtown, to Jesse Gardner's in like Pennsylvania Avenue, right by the White House. So that's there was historically a lot of things offered to the Black community at the District Wharf and Fish Market. Currently, however, facing some different challenges. As you can see with the image, it looks drastically different. We're talking luxury apartment blocks, high-end restaurants, bars. In this Black building here, nestled halfway along the waterfront, is actually a concert hall. This place people such as Billie Eilish and the 1975 will come and perform at. So much more of a high-end feel to it. And even since between the visits I took here, I found that there was several new buildings being thrown up. This area is only being expanded, and with the mechanism of gentrification continue to rolling in and pushing out the historically African American community that was here, which is obviously quite controversial because these are the people before. These are the people who built up the fish market, which you can honestly barely see in this photo now. They're nestled away under the highway in a corner, overshadowed by these big buildings. So it's quite problematic. And we've talked extensively class about the issues of gentrification, and it's very much seen here at the District Wharf. And so when I actually visited the fish market, I found that it's the oldest open-air fish market in the United States. It opened in 1805 and has been here since, despite the changes. What we see with this parking lot here, that's actually now gone with the new buildings. They've opened up some high-end bars kind of along the side here. Okay, so it's kind of it's in some ways infringing on it. And I know businesses such as Captain White's have drawn significant have had some issues with, and I think even lawsuits between the new project and the existing fish market. And here is a video of when I went. Okay. So going forward, there are some key threats to the industry. I think the first one is, it's quite a global issue. Pollution, climate change. How is the area being affected? How much fish is left there, to catch? I mean, at the start, when steam crabs first started being sold at amusement parks, a large crab was like 10 inches fin to fin. Nowadays a large crab's we're talking 5-6 inches. So there's there's some issues with sustainability and potentially over harvesting with that, but also a decrease in the Chesapeake grasses with eutrophication in terms of runoff, fertilizers, algae grows, which stops these grasses from growing. And this means that the nursing and feeding grounds for oysters and crabs are gradually getting lost. It's even decreased further since 2006, so it's quite concerning. Then you also paired with this, you have the contamination of the rivers with industrial compounds such as PCB. And this is something that got discontinued in the 70s, but the residue maintains here and has actually contaminated some of the local fish, including what was a delicacy, which is rockfish, which actually is now on a do not eat list from the DC government. So, when I went to the wharf, I expected to see this in every single menu, and it just wasn't there, which really speaks to the change that and the impact that environmental change is happening on the industry. And of course, it's definitely not exempt from the impact of COVID-19. With the loss of, the restaurant industry has really suffered throughout this pandemic, and thus, they're not buying, they can't buy as much seafood. They're not going to be able to sell it. So the supply chains of the seafood industry are really being impacted. One such example is Congressional Seafood out past the northeast of DC, has lost 75% of its business due to the pandemic. And whilst there is some kind of supporting like the CARES Act, it's just simply not enough to keep people going. And actually, back in April, Main Avenue Fish Market had to be closed because there was just too many people for crab season, and the issues of the virus were impacting those kind of booming parts of the season. And finally, this kind of links back to gentrification, but we have the migration of labor. Less and less people are on the Chesapeake Bay, are around the rivers and lakes fishing. They're moving back into the urban environments. They're moving away from where they historically were. This is changing like the nature of the Black community that was there, such as Kent Island, which originally had like 100, at any one time 100 Black fishermen, sailors, whatever. Now it's like 7 or 10, not many at all. Instead, what's happening now is they're bringing in immigrants from Central America and other places on like monthly seasonal visas to go and work these because there's not enough domestic labor to support it. So these are some of the issues that are really threatening the industry and potentially the cuisine itself going forward. Aside from that, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving.